I'm Michael Rasmussen. I'm an analyst. Gosh, I have 29 years total experience, 22 of them as an analyst. I define my job as research. I spend my time understanding what are the challenges companies like yourselves face in context of governance, risk management, and compliance, and how do they go about solving that with strategy, process, and technology. So I spent 7 years at Forrester Research, and I guess my claim to fame is in February 2002, on a cold, snowy day in the Chicago office of Forrester, I defined and modeled a market and labeled it GRC. So I've been called the father of GRC from that perspective. But today we're going to talk about GRC and how it's changing, how it's evolving, and how you can build the best GRC strategy for your organization. A future of agility, resilience, integrity, accountability, and engagement. But the challenge in organizations today is that risk is complex. It's interconnected. It cascades and intersects and creates other risks. We have to be able to manage and see all this. The physicist Friedrich Koppler stated, the more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic risks, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. The physicist at this point in time was talking about biological ecosystems, but he might as well be talking about business risk today. It's an interconnected risk environment. COVID-19 is just one example. What starts off with the health and safety risks increase our IT security risk, particularly from the work from home environment, privacy risk in the work from home environment, conduct risk, modern slavery risk, factories go dark, they reopen to child labor and forced labor, bribery and corruption risk. It's an interconnected risk environment. And today's organization has to be able to see all this risk and also see risk relationships and scenarios. Risk cannot be managed in silos anymore that don't talk to each other. We have to be able to see the big picture of risk and those risk connections. The organization today needs to be able to see the tree as well as the forest, that individual risk and the interconnectedness of risks, and everything that's changing. Global financial services firms are dealing with 257 regulatory change events every business day coming from 1,217 regulators around the world. That's a lot of regulatory change and regulatory risk. But there's changes in the geopolitical risk environment, economic risks environment, the energy risks and market and commodity risks and everything. And then we have the changes in our own internal business environment. We have to keep all this change in sync. Now, the tree and the forest analogy people like, but I've also been challenged on this slide twice. Once by one large global bank here in London at one of my workshops, another time in San Francisco, just a week apart from a different bank. They said, great analogy, the tree and the forest. But the reality in our organization, it's also the leaves and the branches. We got to get down to the details. That small vulnerability or exposure can cascade to become a big issue. The little things matter because they grow to be big things, because risk often acts like a set of dominoes just falling over and snowballing, getting bigger and bigger too, like a snowball going down a hill. You need to be able to see the tree as well as the forest. We have things like chaos theory, where the flutter of the butterfly's wings in the Netherlands makes tiny atmospheric changes that can influence the development and path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Those little tiny things can become big themes. So enter GRC. There's a lot of different definitions and things that we've used for things, and we have different acronyms. ERM, ORM, IRM, GRC, ABC, XYZ. You know, maybe you don't even have a name for what you're doing. But from my point of view, every organization does GRC, whether you call it GRC or something else. I don't think we're going to find one organization out there that says, we don't govern the organization, we can care less about risk, and we don't pay attention to laws and regulations. Every organization has some approach to GRC, whether you call it GRC or not. So when I enter an organization, it's more about a maturity model. Are you at that ad hoc firefighting reaction stage where you're really addressing risk and compliance and somebody's screaming at you? You know, or that second level stage where you're managing it in a lot of document spreadsheets and emails at departments that don't talk to each other? Or is it a mature level 3 department stage? Or is it a 4 integrated stage across departments? Or is it a 5 agile stage where you're actually looking at how do we better perform the organization and meet our objectives? It's really more of a maturity discussion, not do we use the acronym or not. Because from my point of view, if whether you use the acronym or not, you're doing GRC in some context or form in your organization. The other thing is important to note is that you don't go and buy GRC. GRC are actions and behaviors of the organization. There's GRC technology, like metric stream, but that enables us to be more efficient, effective, and agile in GRC in our organization. It doesn't deliver GRC. I don't like it when I get called on the phone, like a large insurance company called me and said, we just bought GRC, now come and tell us how to do GRC. Well, that's sort of putting the cart before the horse. What were you doing before, and what are you trying to change, and what are you trying to make better? GRC by definition, and this is found in the OSEG GRC capability model that I helped contribute to, that GRC is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance function. Objectives can be entity-level objectives, like financial performance objectives, ESG objectives, other objectives of the organization. They could be divisional, department, process, project, or even asset-level objectives. GRC is a capability to help us reliably achieve objectives. That's governance. And address uncertainty. That's risk management. ISO 31000, the international standard on risk management, says that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. There's a relationship there. We don't just wake up one day and say, I feel like doing a risk assessment. We need context for a risk assessment. The objectives of the organization, whether they're strategic entity-level objectives, process, department-level objectives, asset-level objectives, that puts context so we can do a risk assessment and measure uncertainty in. And so risk assessment depends on governance. And act with integrity, that's compliance. Not just compliance to laws and regulations, but to the values, ESG commitments, contractual commitments of the organization. But risk management also needs compliance. We cannot do risk management without compliance and controls. When we have a risk, there's 4 things we can do with the risk. We can accept the risk as it is. We can avoid the risk, if that's possible. We can transfer the risk, like through hedging and derivatives, insurance, or we can mitigate the risk. Well, if we go and do our little risk assessment and we have our heat map, and I'm not a huge fan of heat maps, we'll use it for this example. You know, we have our inherent risk up here, and if we implement these controls, we can move to this acceptable residual risk. Great, my risk assessment's done. Well, who says those controls are implemented and they're being effective and monitored out there in the environment? Compliance does. That's a compliance function. Risk is completely dependent on compliance for the follow-through, or else why are we even doing risk assessments? Don't waste your time. Risk assessment requires some type of follow-through with compliance and controls to ensure that the controls we identified are in place and functioning and operational. That's why I like the GRC acronym. There's a natural flow and context to how that all comes together. Governance sets direction and strategy for the organization to reliably achieve objectives. Governance sets the context for risk management. Without context, risk management fails. Risk management seeks to manage and understand uncertainty by identification, assessment, and monitoring of risk within context to act on risk through risk acceptance, risk avoidance, risk mitigation, or risk transfer. Compliance aims to see that the organization acts with integrity in fulfilling its regulatory, contractual, and self-imposed obligations like ESG and values. Compliance follows through on risk treatment plans to ensure that risk is being managed within limits and controls are in place and functioning. Now, there's 5 strategic trends that I'm monitoring for 2023 in GRC. They are agility, resilience, integrity, accountability, and engagement. The number one thing I'm talking to organizations about right now is how do we become agile in risk? How do we see what's coming at us? You know, the past few years, we've been focused on the resilience. You know, with COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, and the geopolitical risks and inflation in the economy, we've been very reactive in trying to be resilient. If I'm running down the street and I trip over a pothole or a curb and fall on my face, resilience is how quickly can I get back up and start running again. Agility, on the other hand, is that ability to see what's in front of me, navigate the environment, see that pothole and jump over it, go around it. Organizations I'm talking to in my research want to be agile, to be able to see what's developing 6 months, a year out on the horizon, geopolitical risks, regulatory trends, what's coming at the organization, and how can we prepare the organization to be able to mitigate exposure, avoid exposure, or actually even use the risk to our advantage and opportunity and gain in the organization. Judge Mervyn Keane of South Africa, the impetus of the Keane 1, 2, 3, and now 4 reports of corporate governance says risk is the undertaking of, enterprise is the undertaking of risk for reward. Enterprise is the undertaking of risk for reward. Businesses take risks to make money. A US president, Teddy Roosevelt, from over 100 years ago said, risk is like fire. If controlled, it will help you. If uncontrolled, it will rise up and destroy you. Risk is actually a tool for the business and organization. If used properly, through risk agility, we can leverage the environment. But we also do need to be resilient. And the last 3 years have proved that too, because we will have risk events. And they will happen, and we need to be able to navigate the environment. But the other big trend besides agility and resilience, those two trends, is integrity. ESG is all about integrity. What I communicate to the world in my code of conduct, my values, my policies, like my inclusivity, diversity policies, my environmental policies, my health and safety policies, you know, my other conduct, my bribery and corruption related policies, gifts, entertainment, hospitality expenses, whatever it might be, that's a reality to the organization. You unpack ESG, there's a lot there under the E, the S, and the G. I could spend a whole presentation specifically on just unpacking ESG, but it is broad. But at the end of the day, how do you start ESG? Well, sure, you put somebody in charge of it, but what are your policies? What does your code of conduct say? Well, what's your HR policies on inclusivity and diversity and all these other elements, your child labor, modern slavery type policies? What are they? What do your policies say? ESG starts with policies and understanding that, then monitoring the environment to ensure that we conform to those policies and be able to report on those policies and the different formats and things out there as well. But ESG is a huge focus, and it all gets down to the integrity. What we've defined are the values of the organization and objectives of the organizations around the environment and things. Are we actually performing and hitting those objectives? And then we have the era of accountability. And this is huge. Accountability is different from responsibility. Responsibilities I can outsource and give to somebody else. I can take tasks and give them to you or you or you. That's responsibilities. Accountability means I own this. I cannot give out accountability. And we see a whole swath of accountability regimes around the world. What started in the United Kingdom with SMCR, Senior Managers Regime, Certification Regime, Ireland's SEER, Australia's BEAR, now FEAR regime. That's the best name for a regulation ever, the FEAR regulation. You've got Hong Kong's Managers in Charge, Singapore's Individual Accountability and Conduct Regime, South Africa has one now. Putting accountability, but that's not all. You look at what's going on in the United States, and you look at the focus of the U.S. Department of Justice on greater focus on accountability with executives for compliance. You look at what's happening in New York State and also California on greater focus on accountability of executives for risk compliance and controls. You look at Uber's Chief Information Security Officer that was held legally liable for information security issues at Uber. We're seeing a huge focus and trend and accountability globally right now, and it's impacting every aspect of GRC. But that also means we need engagement. We need to be able to move GRC from back office functions of risk and compliance to front office engagement. That teller at the bank is making decisions on fraud, cash handling, privacy, money laundering every moment of the day. The doctor and nurse at a hospital are making decisions on patient safety and patient privacy every moment of the day. That coal miner in the Welsh coal mine is making decisions on environmental and health and safety every minute of the day. We need to engage not just back office functions, but the front office, from executives all the way down to frontline employees, because that's where risk is taken and managed and discovered and owned. We need engagement. But because of the complexity of business today, we need to be able to engage both the left brain thinking on risk as well as the right brain thinking. The left brain is that logical and structured thinking on risk, that think inside the box. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. You know, that quantitative, structured thinking of risk, that's very important. But the problem with risk models and things is they only represent the real world. They aren't the real world. The real world is way too complex to put into one model with all of its variables and inputs. And so they represent the real world, and hopefully they're fairly accurate, but there's things that change. The world is so complex and dynamic that we need to bring in right brain thinking on risk. The creative, imaginative, outside the box thinking. Alvin Toffler said you can use all the quantitative data you can get, but you still have to distrust it and use your own intelligence and judgment. My point of view is both are right. Good risk management is going to involve engaging both the left brain thinkers and right brain thinkers to think inside the box and within our risk models. What are they telling us? Outside the box, where are these models weak? Where can they break down? What's happening in the environment that needs to be revised the way we think about risk? Now, we've been on a 20-year journey of risk, GRC technology. I first defined GRC technology back in February 2002. So we're going on 21 years in a few months. And we started off with GRC 1.0, which I defined GRC broadly at the time, but Sarbanes-Oxley came out that year. So I called it Sarbanes-Oxley captivity of GRC. But after a period of time, we moved to enterprise GRC, where we started to move and try to connect all these back office, second and third line functions to get them to work together. GRC 3.0 is, well, there's best of breed solutions. There's content that needs to integrate out there, and we need to integrate business systems, HR systems, and ERP systems. And so GRC architecture, there can be a core platform, but we need to extend and integrate with other systems. But, you know, that's where a fundamental change happened at GRC 3.0. The technology became very complex. There's a lot of customization and coding and things to get things to integrate and work, and huge projects that took multiple years to roll out, and things changed. And so we came into a new generation of technology, like with metric stream, that'd be M7 and beyond, to where we had agile GRC, intuitive, engaging, lower cost to implement, own, and maintain, that can adapt to the organization with low code or no code solutions. That's agile GRC. And now we're moving and building on agile GRC, and we're not replacing it, but we're building, adding on, like with cognitive technologies. I mean, the session before us, we were just going through some of those cognitive artificial intelligence technologies. Cube, one of the vendors out there, does artificial intelligence for regulatory change management. And that's built on top of like an agile GRC platform, like metric stream's current version. And so we're bringing in that to help automate and provide deeper value to make governance, risk, and compliance more efficient, effective, and agile in the organization. So some 5-step plans to building your GRC strategy. First off, understand where are you at and where are you headed. What's your current state? You're doing GRC in some form or fashion today. What does it look like? What's working? What's not working? What needs to change? And then what's your future state? What do you want it to look like in 2 years from now? And what's your roadmap to get there? The second one is making sure you get the right team on board. That you have the right team members, they're working together, they're engaged, they understand the vision and mission, the roadmap and strategy, and they're working as a team. The third one is you want to make sure you have the right technology. You don't want to start with the wrong technology to find out 6 months, a year into your project that you got to replace it and start all over again. That's a failed project. If you're climbing a mountain and only have enough equipment to get halfway up and you have to come all the way back down and start over again, you're too tired for the climb. You want to make sure that you start with a technology platform that can achieve what your future state is that you're aiming for. And then you have to break things up into stages. You don't just run up Mount Everest. If you run up Mount Everest, what happens? You die. Your body actually has to acclimate to the altitude at certain levels before your body's actually physically ready to get to the next level of Mount Everest. The same thing with a big GRC project. You need to break it up into stages that are achievable, digestible, that can be done and value achieved before we move on to the next stage. But as I've already stated, the world is dynamic. There's lots of change in the environment. There's risk change, regulatory change, business change, mergers and acquisitions. We have pandemics, and we have wars, and we have inflation, and the economic stress and strain, and recession, and all this. There's a lot coming at us. But that's what makes our jobs exciting, because there's always something to adapt to. We have to understand risk. It's not a static environment. Risk is a very dynamic, changing environment, and that makes our jobs very, very interesting. So we want to be able to achieve agile and cognitive GRC. So we're more aware of the complex risks and their interrelationships and connections in the organization, that we can align and work together across departments and functions. We can be responsive to issues as they start to develop. We can become agile in forecasting, seeing what's happening on the horizon and prepare the organization. We can be resilient to recover quickly and efficiently, and be efficient in our use of human capital and financial capital resources. So with that, I think, do we have time for a question, did I hear?
Yeah, we have time for a question if there's any. Yep. And by the way, thank you, Michael. I know you did that super quick for us, but thank you.
Well, you said I had to make sure everybody gets out of here on time.
Maybe just a question, Michael, about the differences in the world. About, is there a difference in implementing GRC in the US versus Europe or
there
Asia?
certainly is.
Can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Technically, I'm busier in engagements over here in the United Kingdom and Europe than I am in North America right now. But maybe that's just, I have a lot of trips over here and focus on this more than other analysts. but I'm very busy over in the UK and Europe. I find that Europe broadly, and I'll include UK and Europe right now, but it has a more business pragmatic focus on GRC, where a lot of times when you talk about risk management, in Europe, it's much more of a business perspective on risk. In the United States, North America, it tends to be more of a compliance focus of risk. You know, I need to have some type of risk function to check a checkbox to, you know, get past the regulator. I find risk is more mature in Europe than I do in North America. I'm generalizing, so there are exceptions on both sides. It's interesting though, when I look at the RFPs here in Europe, I look at the DACH region, the German region, they can over-engineer their RFPs. I mean, like there's one RFP right now that has over 400 requirements in it. A lot of depth and detail in it. I find some of the most pragmatic RFPs in the Benelux and Nordics regions. They tend to be a little more straightforward and pragmatic in the way they approach technology RFPs. And UK is right there too. But it's sort of interesting, some of the different dynamics. But to answer your question, I would say there's a more business perspective of governance, risk, and compliance in Europe than I find in North America. North America, it might be more CRG than GRC. And in that context, when in European RFPs, I've seen a lot more requests for things like business process modeling and understanding business processes and objectives and things. So quite interesting there.
There is one question. Varun, if you can... Oh, he's coming to you.
Michael, any chance you could share that German RFP with us? Unless Metrixim already has it.
I think you guys are there.
We are there. All right. Thank you. Just checking.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for that.